The nail that stands out gets hammered down. But what if the nail becomes gold? Asian proverb. The world applauds Singapore, a speck of land that became a legend. In less than a lifetime, it rose from poverty to perfection, from fishing village to financial powerhouse. It built order in a region of chaos and discipline in an age of distraction. But the brighter the light, the darker the shadows it casts. Behind the admiration lies irritation. Behind respect, resentment. For every nation that praises Singapore's miracle, there is another that quietly resents its power, its independence, its success. Why do so many nations, near and far, quietly bristle at this tiny city-state that simply refuses to fail? This is not the story of hatred born of evil. It is the story of envy born of excellence. These are 10 countries that hate Singapore and the hidden truths behind their disdain. Country number 1. Malaysia, the rival next door. Malaysia and Singapore share the same roots, 2 nations born from the same soil, shaped by the same colonial hands, and molded by the same storms of history. Yet destiny, in its cruel precision, chose to divide them. What began as a partnership of hope ended in a separation carved by pride, politics, and personality. In 1965, Singapore was cast out, a young island told to survive alone. Many expected it to crumble. Instead, it rose like steel from salt water, turning rejection into resolve, humiliation into hunger. And that is where the rivalry began, not in hatred but in comparison. Because every time Malaysia looks across the causeway, it sees not an enemy, but a mirror reflecting a version of itself that could have been a nation unshackled by corruption, united by discipline, and driven by merit. Their histories intertwine like rival siblings, quarreling over bridges, water agreements, airspace, and the smallest symbols of sovereignty. Trade disputes flare, diplomatic words grow sharp, and yet beneath every tension lies an unspoken truth. They know each other too well. To Malaysia, Singapore is a constant reminder that success is possible without size, that influence does not depend on land, and that efficiency can outshine abundance. For Singapore, Malaysia is a reminder of where it came from, the shared bloodline that still beats beneath the borderlines. So they smile across the causeway, exchange handshakes and headlines, and tell the world they are partners in progress. But behind those smiles lingers an old emotion, not hatred, but wounded pride. Because nothing cuts deeper than seeing your reflection, living the dream you once imagined for yourself. Country number 2. Indonesia, the competitive neighbor. Indonesia, the sleeping giant of Southeast Asia, a nation of more than 17,000 islands, woven together by oceans, faith, and fire. It is a land of vast beauty and untapped power, of volcanoes that breathe smoke into the heavens, and people who carry centuries of culture and pride. Just across its waters lies Singapore, a city so small it could vanish inside one of Indonesia's provinces, and yet so efficient, so disciplined, that it commands the respect of the entire region. On the map, it is a mere dot. In the global economy, it is a force that moves billions. Jakarta looks at Singapore with a complicated gaze. One eye sees opportunity, the other sees irritation. They trade, they collaborate, they rely on each other's strengths. Indonesia provides the labor, the land, the resources. Singapore brings the capital, the order, the vision. Together, they form an uneasy harmony, a partnership balance between pride and pragmatism. But beneath that balance lies tension. Every year, as the haze drifts from Indonesian forests and darkens Singapore's skies, resentment rises like smoke between them. Singapore complains of pollution. Indonesia retorts with sovereignty. To Jakarta, the criticism feels condescending, as if the smaller nation is lecturing the larger one. The military exercises of Singapore's armed forces also stir unease. For Indonesia, seeing a tiny city-state operate one of the most advanced militaries in Asia is both impressive and unnerving. It raises a quiet question. How did such a small neighbor learn to wield such power with such precision? Indonesia wrestles daily with the challenge of its own magnitude, archipelagos to govern, economies to unify, and inequalities to bridge. Singapore, by contrast, runs like a clock, timed, efficient, and ruthless in its order. What takes others years, Singapore completes in months. What others debate endlessly, Singapore decides overnight. And so, admiration turns to envy. Jealousy finds fertile ground not in hatred, but, in contrast, the vast against the tiny, the chaotic against the controlled, the potential against the perfected. In the quiet corridors of regional diplomacy, Indonesia may call Singapore its friend, its partner, even its example. But deep within the pride of a great nation, there lingers a whisper, a question that stings the heart. How did that little island do what we could not? Country number 3. China. The independent rebel, China sees in Singapore a reflection of itself, orderly, disciplined, and guided by Confucian restraint. It admires the city-state's governance, its moral clarity, its meritocratic steel. But admiration has a limit. Beijing expects loyalty, especially from those it considers part of the same civilizational bloodline. Yet Singapore refuses to bend. It trades with the United States, drills with Western armies, and still greets Chinese officials with perfect courtesy. It bows to none. This quiet independence unsettles Beijing. How can a nation so small move so freely between the spheres of giants? How can a Chinese majority state live under Western capitalism, yet embody Confucian virtue better than China itself? In the corridors of Zhongnanhai, Singapore's neutrality is seen not as balance, but as defiance, a polite, smiling rebellion. A tiny mirror reflecting the China that once was, measured, wise, and morally grounded. Before ambition replaced restraint, Singapore stands as a whisper of what China could have been had it chosen stability over dominance, clarity over control, and respect over fear. And for that, Beijing admires and resents the Lion City in equal measure. Country number 4. The United States, the unpredictable ally. Washington adores loyalty. It rewards obedience with praise and partnership. But Singapore does not obey, it calculates. To the Americans, Singapore is a curious ally, a friend who hosts U.S. warships and yet opens its doors to Chinese investors. A partner in defense, but a competitor in influence. To Washington, this is uncomfortable. Superpowers prefer predictability. They dislike small nations that play chess instead of checkers. But Singapore plays the long game. It refuses to choose sides, for choosing sides means surrendering control. America sees this balance as double dealing. Singapore calls it survival, because the Lion City knows one truth, that every small nation must learn. The world's power shifts like the tide, and those who build on loyalty alone are swept away by it. In quiet moments, U.S. diplomats admit their frustration. How can a city so small be so sovereign? But beneath that irritation lies respect for Singapore's unmatched ability to walk the razor's edge between empires and never lose its footing. Country number 5. India. The immigration friction. India and Singapore are bound by centuries of shared history, temples, trade routes, and human movement. Indian merchants helped shape early Singapore, and today, Indian professionals fill its offices, schools, and boardrooms. But under this partnership lies unease. Singapore's unforgiving meritocracy clashes with India's love for flexibility and influence. Singapore measures worth in precision, India in potential. Where Singapore values discipline, India celebrates diversity, and sometimes disorder. The tension surfaces in visas denied, in job quotas tightened, in whispers that Singapore prefers efficiency over empathy. To many Indians, the Lion City's gates seem to close too quickly. They admire its brilliance, but bristle at its exclusivity. The irony is bitter. Two nations of intellect and ambition, bound by heritage, now divided by opportunity. Each sees in the other what it lacks. India sees Singapore's order. Singapore sees India's soul. Together, they could build wonders. But pride keeps the bridge half finished. Country number 6. Australia. The subtle rivalry. For decades, Australia saw itself as Asia's bridge to the West, a gateway of stability, democracy, and modern education. Then came Singapore, and the bridge became a rival. Within a generation, Singapore transformed itself from colonial outpost to global powerhouse. Its airlines, its universities, its ports, all began to surpass those of the continent it once admired. What Australia did with space, Singapore did with precision. What Australia had in land, Singapore matched in intellect. Canberra's officials smile politely in regional meetings, but in private, they watch the Lion City with quiet astonishment. How did this tropical island outpace a continent in finance, aviation, and influence? Singapore mastered both East and West, without losing itself to either. And that perhaps is what unsettles Australia the most, because for all its Western confidence, it is Singapore, not Sydney, that now sets the standard for the Asian century. Country number 7. The Philippines. The respect that hurts. Every year, thousands of Filipinos journey to Singapore in search of work, opportunity, and a better life. Many succeed. They find safety, prosperity, and dignity. But for some, the dream comes with shadows. In Singapore's rigid system, warmth often yields to order, and emotion bows to efficiency. To the Filipino heart, expressive, proud, deeply human, this feels cold. Stories of discrimination and subtle exclusion echo back across the sea. Yet, beneath the hurt, there remains deep respect. For Singapore is everything the Philippines aspires to build: clean, disciplined, and incorruptible. But admiration mixed with exclusion becomes pain. It is not hatred born of anger, but of longing, the desire to be treated not as labor, but as equals in a shared dream of progress. The Philippines respect Singapore deeply, but respect, when unanswered by warmth, turns quietly into resentment. Country number 8. Thailand. The economic competitor. Bangkok and Singapore, two jewels of Southeast Asia, each claiming the heart of the region in its own way. Thailand seduces with charm, with culture, with the softness of smiles. Singapore impresses with efficiency, with brilliance, with perfection in motion. One wins hearts, the other wins contracts. One is fluid, the other flawless. Their competition is rarely loud, but it is constant. In tourism, in business, in influence, they chase the same crown, Asia's most dynamic crossroads. Behind the scenes, Thai policymakers quietly admire the Singaporean formula: the discipline, the lack of corruption, the unity of purpose. Because Thailand knows that beauty alone cannot build empires. Discipline can, and in that discipline lies the secret to Singapore's unshakable success. Country number 9. Russia. The distant discontent. When Singapore joined Western sanctions against Russia, Moscow noticed. A tiny island had taken a stand, and the Kremlin felt its sting. To Russia, Singapore's move was arrogance, a small nation pretending to carry the moral authority of giants. But to Singapore, it was not arrogance, it was principle. A statement that even the smallest voice can speak for the rule of law. The decision surprised Moscow, not because it mattered economically, but because it mattered symbolically. Singapore had chosen justice over neutrality, morality over convenience. And that is what truly unsettled Russia. The idea that power can come from conviction, not from weapons or land. In its quiet firmness, Singapore became a reminder that respect is not earned through fear, but through integrity. Country number 10. North Korea. The political hostility. In 2018, history crossed paths in Singapore. Kim Jong-un met Donald Trump, the first meeting of its kind, on neutral ground that belonged to neither East nor West. The world applauded Singapore's diplomacy. It had done what few could: bring together two leaders, divided by decades of hostility. But in Pyongyang, the moment was seen differently. For North Korea, the summit was humiliation, a performance on foreign soil, under the eyes of cameras and capitalists. And Singapore, the host, became part of that humiliation. Since then, North Korea has treated Singapore not as a neutral ground, but as a symbol of everything it despises: wealth, order, and openness. In its eyes, Singapore stands with the world that isolates it. Yet even in its hostility, there lies a strange respect, for Pyongyang knows what the world knows, that only a nation trusted by both enemies could host a meeting between them. And that, perhaps, is Singapore's quietest victory. So why do they hate Singapore? Because Singapore is a mirror that exposes excuses, dismantles complacency, and reflects what discipline can build when emotion sleeps. It reminds nations that success is not born from size, nor from the accident of wealth, but from the relentless pursuit of order and purpose. Many nations look at Singapore and see discomfort, because it makes their failures impossible to hide. It shows that corruption is not destiny, that chaos is a choice, and that discipline, when held long enough, can turn fragility into strength. They call it cold, but coldness is only the price of precision. They call it strict, but strictness is what keeps chaos outside the door. They call it emotionless, but emotionless is how a small nation survives a noisy world. This city of 5 million people has no gold in its ground, no oil beneath its seas, no vast land to cultivate, no army large enough to command fear. Yet it has mastered something rarer than all of that: the art of collective will. Singapore stands as proof that destiny can be engineered, that order can outshine chaos, that humility, quiet, calculated humility, can command more power than any army. While others fight over ideology, Singapore builds policy. While others chase applause, Singapore chases perfection. And so the world admires it, envies it, and yes, sometimes hates it. Because hatred is the echo of admiration, in hearts too proud to say the word aloud. Every empire fears the idea that greatness can come from somewhere small, that a nation smaller than their cities can outthink their governments, outplan their economies, and outlast their politics. So let them hate, because hatred is only the shadow cast by greatness. And if the world still hates Singapore, it is only because the world still fears what one small, determined people can achieve when they choose discipline over chaos, vision over comfort, and nation over self. If you found this story enlightening, like, share, and subscribe to the Asian Scrolls, where we uncover the untold truths of Asia, one story at a time.